The town had long since forgotten the house that stood at the edge of the woods. It was a place no one dared speak of, a shadow that clung to the history of the town like a scar. Generations had passed, and the house, weathered and ancient, continued to loom over the land. Its stone walls, now covered in creeping ivy, were cracked, and its windows were black voids that seemed to stare at the world with an insatiable hunger. No one knew who had lived there, or perhaps more accurately, no one who had dared venture close had ever returned to tell the tale. The house was a legend in itself, whispered about in the darkest corners of the tavern, spoken of only when the wind howled through the streets. It was said to drink blood, to consume the very life force of those who ventured too close. But for Emma, the legends only fueled her curiosity. She had heard the stories all her life, heard the warnings given to children who strayed too far from home, but something inside her yearned to know more. The truth called to her louder than the warnings, louder than her fear. Emma stood in front of the house as dusk fell, her heart pounding in her chest, a cold breeze tugging at her jacket. She had read about the house, heard every version of the story, but none of them truly explained the pull she felt, the way the house seemed to whisper her name. It was as though the house itself knew she was coming, waiting for her. She had come alone. Many before her had attempted to discover its secrets, only to disappear without a trace. She felt that same trepidation settle into her bones, but her resolve was firm. She wasn't like the others. She would uncover the truth whether the house wanted her to or not. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, the rusted iron groaning in protest. The cold, stale air wrapped around her, and the scent of decay filled her nose. It was as if the house itself was exhaling, a living creature with an insatiable breath, pulling her into its grasp. She stepped cautiously onto the property, the ground beneath her feet uneven, covered with thick moss that seemed to swallow her every step. She didn't look back. There was no turning back now. With each step, the house seemed to grow larger, its looming presence engulfing her, until she stood before the door. It was slightly ajar, as if waiting for her to cross its threshold, to step into the unknown. The house felt alive, alive and hungry. The moment Emma crossed the threshold, the air inside the house grew colder, heavier, as if she had stepped into another world entirely. The door creaked shut behind her, sealing her fate, trapping her inside. The scent of mildew and old wood flooded her senses, and the silence was deafening. There was no sound of the wind, no hum of the outside world, only the oppressive quiet that clung to the walls, as though the house itself had swallowed every sound over the years. She couldn't see much in the dim light filtering through the dust-covered windows, but her eyes quickly adjusted to the gloom. She noticed the walls were lined with old, faded portraits of people she didn't recognize. Their eyes seemed to follow her, cold and lifeless. As she took a step deeper into the house, she felt a strange, inexplicable sensation that she wasn't alone, that something was watching her, something ancient and sinister. The house seemed to breathe around her, each creak and groan of the floorboards like the sound of a living creature shifting in its slumber. Emma paused, her breath shallow, unsure whether it was the house itself making these sounds or something else, something worse. But she pressed forward, drawn by the need to understand, to uncover what had brought this place to life in the first place. What secret did it keep buried beneath its decaying walls? Up ahead, she noticed a staircase leading to the second floor. It seemed almost inviting, though Emma couldn't explain why. She felt an intense compulsion to climb it, to move deeper into the heart of the house. The stairs were made of old wood, groaning under her weight with every step, the sound echoing through the empty halls like a warning. The house seemed to respond to her movement, the whisper starting, faint at first, almost imperceptible, like the rustling of wind through dead leaves. But as she ascended, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, a cacophony of voices she couldn't understand. Her heart hammered in her chest as the sound seemed to grow closer, as though the voices were circling her, suffocating her. Emma's steps faltered as she reached the top of the stairs, the air growing thicker, heavier with every breath. Her feet were leaden, as if the house itself were trying to pull her back, to keep her trapped in its grasp. And then from the darkness ahead, a cold, hollow laugh echoed, sending a jolt of terror through her body. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, but the laughter was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving only the silence in its wake. Emma's skin crawled as she tried to make sense of what she had heard, but there was no time for answers. Something was waiting for her. She could feel it, lurking in the shadows, its presence just beyond her sight. She pushed the door open slowly, the faintest creak signaling her entry into the next room. The air was thick with dust, the room heavy with the weight of forgotten years. She could see the outline of old furniture, shrouded in sheets, the remnants of a past long lost to time. But in the far corner of the room, something was different. The air seemed colder there, and the shadows seemed deeper, as though they were waiting, watching her every move. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a dark shape in the corner. It was a figure, hunched and twisted, its features hidden in the darkness. Emma's breath hitched, and her body tensed, but she couldn't look away. It was as if the figure was calling to her, its presence pulling her toward it. As she stepped closer, the figure remained still, its form barely visible in the dim light. But the closer she got, the more she felt the weight of its gaze. Its eyes, burning with an unnatural hunger, locked onto her. The air around her grew thick with the scent of iron, a sharp, metallic tang that made her stomach turn. She didn't want to look, didn't want to get any closer, but her feet betrayed her. She was drawn in, as if the figure were a magnet, and she was the iron. And then, just as she was within arm's reach, the figure suddenly moved, its face twisting into a grotesque, gaping maw of blood and teeth. The room exploded with an overwhelming sense of terror, and Emma stumbled back, her heart racing as the house seemed to shift around her, as if alive, hungry for her fear. The door slammed shut behind her, trapping her in the dark. She turned, her eyes wide with panic, but the room was no longer as she had seen it. The furniture was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of black. There was no light, no escape, just an infinite darkness that seemed to press in on all sides. The whispers grew louder, now a chorus of agonized screams, each one more frantic, more desperate than the last. And through it all, the figure in the corner remained, its eyes glowing red, its hunger palpable. It stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring every moment, every drop of fear that poured from her. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled backward, but her feet caught on something, sending her crashing to the ground. As she struggled to rise, she felt the ground beneath her give way, like the house was shifting, moving beneath her, swallowing her whole. And then, just as she thought she would be consumed, the figure lunged, its cold, bony hand reaching out to claim her. The darkness closed in, and Emma screamed, but no sound escaped her lips.